Bridget, I'll start with you since you're sitting right next to me. Can healthcare law survive without funding? And do you believe that ultimately the Republicans can defund healthcare?
Well, they absolutely can defund healthcare. I mean, that is, they're in control of the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is the entity charged with allocating money for, any set of expenditures. I think what we're really seeing here is a political line being drawn in the sand, where when Tea Party candidates and other Republicans sought election last year, the premise was defunding and undermining President Obama's health care plan. This is one tactic that they can use to at least call public attention to their stance. And I think that this is a continuation of that argument that we'll be seeing playing out in the days and weeks to come.
David?
Pretty accurate analysis, but let's add a couple more things to this. 34 Democrats who voted against it. A very unpopular bill because, as Nancy Pelosi said, first let's pass it, we'll show you what's in it. Under the thought process that they would still have the House because here comes funding, implementation, rules and regulations in the legislative structure. So they passed something really badly, if you want to call it that, from a legislative strategy point of view. And now that the American people, by and large, have said, well, we need health care reform, but not a government takeover of health care, they now have to live up to it. This is one of the tactics. They do need to investigate the waivers and some of the backroom deals with corporations, Louisiana Purchase, the Cornhusker kickback, all these things that were done to pass these bills. They need to do that, and defunding is one tactic. At the same time, most important, replace it with single bills. You know, we need portability. We need portability, so we should have a bill for portability. Pre-existing conditions, attack the things that we need to fix.
So let me understand. So you're saying if this was legislatively possible to abolish this law altogether as one overall health care law and fracture it in sections and in specifics. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, because it is impossible in Washington to just take a law and then take it apart and say we're going to keep this and we're going to scrap this. It's just not legislatively possible in the structure. So scrap the whole thing. Right now, all we can do is defund it, but replace those parts with existing legislation, which makes that a no longer important. And one of the examples, again, portability, pre-existing conditions.
Portability meaning that if I live in Arizona and then I move to Utah, I can take my insure my self-care
which is an
me
economic-based idea. I mean, a company can operate more efficiently. And I use the example, let's say you're in 20 states as a company. You're essentially dealing with 20 state monopolies, 20 state laws, 20 state
and therefore,
issues.
if you own your company, say you're based in Texas, and you've got satellite offices in those 20 other states, then suddenly you, as the employer, you can have this one health care, choose a company to go with, and you're set. You don't have to worry that, well, you're in this state, so I can't cover you there with this, so I've got to have 5 different or 20 different...
Which encumbers the system, but also for the provider. This is important. For the insurance provider, you can keep your profit margin as a company. You can operate more efficiently because you're not dealing with 20 state offices. You can regionalize things. You basically can operate more efficiently as a corporation, so you can provide Cadillac plans for... And by the way, auto insurance, perfect example of this. Auto insurers are now providing and competing with these top-notch plans at lower prices.
Auto insurance
so you bring down the price.
You need to bring down the price. We agree we need to bring down the price of health insurance as well as auto insurance.
Portability, for all those reasons I mentioned, will help bring it down.
Go ahead, Bridget.
Well, and I also think that your point about cherry picking, I mean, this was an opportunity, the Democrats had the opportunity when they were in control of the House of Representatives to pass this entire package. And they failed to do so, to fund it through the fiscal year. And by failing to do so, they opened the door for this kind of cherry picking. And so now, who can blame Republicans for sitting back and saying we want portability, but we don't want any other policy, or we want certain aspects of the policy, but perhaps not others? And I think that what will wind up happening is there's going to be a great deal of disagreement. This is going to open up the whole set of proposals for all new negotiations. And I think that the Democrats...
And what do you mean by that, for all new negotiations?
Well, I think that everything will now have to be on the table, because we're now talking about funding packages separately. And so if portability, for example, is something that everyone can agree on, then that's going to go forward. But I think that this really provides the opportunity for some serious cherry picking. And I think that President Obama does not want to sit down and have this entire health care package be renegotiated just because of funding.
Well, you know,
So then what would he do?
He has no recourse.
He has said that he would be willing to work with the Republicans. Perhaps there has been people have charged that the president did not do that before putting this thing until this thing got passed as it is now. So now he's saying, look, I do want to hear from the Republicans.
Well, he has no choice.
He has to.
Absolutely.
It's a funny thing in politics when you have no choice.
When your back's up against the wall,
well,
you
have no choice but to be conciliatory and we'll work together. Look,
But 10 weeks ago, he did have a choice.
Yeah,
Right.
and you said he should have made the choice then.
Absolutely.
Well, again, there was legislative strategy failure on the part of the Democrats, but the only way they could get this legislation through was a party line vote because it was unpopular and it was not needed. And if it was so good, why did they need waivers for unions, for companies, etc.?
Couple things. When you say it's not needed, do you mean that overhaul of health care is not needed,
No,
or this particular
particular takeover
Just
of
wanted
healthcare
to
not
clarify
needed.
that. And you mentioned, I mean, look, I think that there are people who would say that the president was hell bent on getting this thing passed, regardless if you pass it and read it later, because this was what he campaigned on. So it was a political.
It was an ideological play for him. This is the belief that he has in the type of health care we need.
But it
His
was
words,
a
not
campaign.
I would actually disagree with you.
Okay,
I mean, I would say that healthcare was not a #1 priority during the campaign. This was something that the president identified. If you remember back to 2008, a lot of it was about ending war and other proposals that perhaps the president hasn't been as successful at accomplishing. This is something that he saw that he thought that he might be able to accomplish. He prioritized it himself. It certainly was up there on the public agenda, but I don't know that it would have been identified as the #1 priority. It was the president himself who showed leadership on this and said, we need to reform health care now.
But then he turned it over to Congress. See, this is the interest. Here's a president who comes into office. You're right. I think he comes in the first day. He gets his first national security briefing, and oh yeah, that issue is not exactly as simple as I said on the campaign trail. Every president runs
pulling
into
out
that.
the troops,
that
got a hard deadline.
That first meeting is a big eye opener. Now he goes to when there is a jobs in a recession and a bad economic issue. He goes after health care, which is an ideological play. This is something that the more progressive members of the Democratic Party have been aiming for 70 years. It has been failed. Healthcare reform has been a failure on both sides of the aisle. And frankly, the president saw that opportunity, and he picked the wrong focus, in my opinion, because had he focused on jobs and on policies, not stimulus and bailouts, which we're now seeing the failures of, we would have gotten a lot further.
And now states are looking for
essentially
bailouts.
The chickens come home to roost, don't they, mister?
Let's talk about this. This is another story that we're talking about on FoxNews.com. Obama lays a trap for eventual GOP. Next year's election is shaping up as another ideological struggle between right and left, a situation President Obama is working overtime to avoid. So let's talk about this. Leading up to November 2012, how should each party strategize in order to win the election?
Well, I think that President Obama is playing this perfectly. I mean, I think if you take a page out of history, if you look at the election, for example, Bill Clinton, he wins election. It looks like a liberal mandate. He too focuses on health care, by the way. Other proposals like gays in the military. He loses Congress in 1994, and so then takes a page and says, you know what, perhaps I need to moderate my stance. Perhaps I need to do some things that these Republicans in the House of Representatives are arguing for. And, oh, by the way, wins a resounding re-election bid in 1996. I think that President Obama is sitting back and saying, I heard the United States, I heard voters in 2010 in these midterm elections.
Right.
I need to mediate my stance. I had 2 years of getting what I wanted. And oh, by the way, a very convenient thing is that now if something doesn't happen, if I'm not able to pull the trigger on something, I have the other guys to blame. I can blame the House of Representatives.
But David, as far as the actual people who support the president, will the president run into problems if he moves a little bit too far to the center?
Well, here's the thing. First, let me start with Obama's no Clinton. Clinton, as a former governor, knew how to literally move to the center. He proved that in his years as governor of Arkansas. And he actually did move. What we've seen now, and the president's own words again to Bill O'Reilly in his interview, he said, I haven't changed. The president is who he is. He was the most liberal senator.
Okay, but you're not answering my question.
No, but I'm
and the
going
question, yeah, you got to get to it because you're going to start pontificating on me, and I don't want to cut you off because you're my friend and everything. But I'm just saying, stick to it. I want to know because I think you have good opinions about this stuff. I asked, how should each party strategize in order to win the election in 2012?
The Republicans should focus less right now on the presidency and focus on the policies. They should focus on fixing the economy. They should focus on legislation that they can own going into 2012. They should also focus on senatorial seats, and they should focus on governor's seats. Here's the reality in 2012. Right now, I have Obama 60-40, 60% probably still winning it. If the economy gets better, the president gets the benefit of a bump. You're the president. It happens. You get blame and credit. That said, you know, the Republicans don't have a strong field right now.
And do they have a strong candidate?
And exactly. And everybody's rushing to the presidential stage, if you will.
Yeah.
Whereas my advice is first govern, fix, and the American people who stand up across party lines and ask for a candidate will say, go ahead, we want somebody to run for the president.